going to go up a level, and actually I'm talking about smart cities in the CTO's perspective, but really also from the perspective of open data. And so I loved Juan's presentation about gathering data, because the human element in gathering the data is one part of that. There's another part of it that's coming from government. There's another part of it that's coming from the infrastructure that's there. And it's interesting because what the question I was dying to ask, but I was getting mic'd, was, when we start sharing those different data sets and the different data catalogs that we have that are either gathered by the crowd, gathered by government, gathered by other sources, then I think we have an interesting concept in open sourcing of large data sets. And that's something I'd like to see us go further with. Yeah. So question, does everyone in the room live in a city? I think just about everyone. How many of you lived in more than one city for at least 2 years? 3? 4? 5? Okay, we're running out of people, running out of hands. These are the 8 cities that I've lived in for more than 2 years. Some of them 5, some of them 10, 15. Minimum was 2 years. And so I'm not going to talk in specifics about one city, but I would like to talk about cities in general. And I think I'm a qualified frequent user of the city infrastructure. And each one of these cities, there are things that I love about them, and there are things that I don't love about them. There's some things that are unique, and then there are things that are actually the connection points that go across cities. And I think the smart cities conversations are useful to us. I want to call out right away that Singapore is probably the smartest city I've lived in. And this is a recent initiative that was just launched by the government called Smart Nation. So we're taking the city structure and broadening it to the nation. Now, Singapore can do that a little bit more easily than many countries, given the size of the country itself. But there's a great deal of emphasis on looking at the best possible infrastructure, as well as getting the right inputs in order to build that infrastructure. Some of you saw the slide earlier today. I was surprised to see it myself, although I put some words on it. Why are cities important? More than 50% of our world population is now living in cities. More than 80% of the GDP in the world is generated in cities. So there's a lot of reason for that. There's also, it's where the crowd is. This is where we have our highest concentrations. We have the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor. Modernizing a city and bringing cities up to our current standards is a complex process. One of the things I saw in Istanbul, which is a city that's centuries old, is how do you lay new infrastructure in that city and without actually disrupting the historical monuments that are there and the items that are there. How do you also leverage, I think what Juan was talking about in terms of bringing the non-connected people online when we look at it from the social side of things. So if you look at the trends in city infrastructure and city work, it's been at the infrastructure layer, hardware layer, and then it's been at the human and social layer. I had to give you a tech trend slide, and I think we've talked about these enough over the last 2 days, but I think the key point of this is it's the combination of these 4 themes that are actually bringing this all together for us. As I said before, government collects an enormous amount of data. This is just, this is at a country level. But if you look at it and you think about the city structure and what makes the city interesting is that cities are cohesive government units. They're cohesive units where the mayor of a city, he has his own police force, he has his own hospital systems, he has education units. He's able to do things with a little bit more autonomy than a federal government or a national, federal and national state. What brings us to the question of open data. And what of that let me go back a slide. Of this data, much of this would not be public information, correct? Much of this would be contained internally, but some of it, and more of it, is becoming available to us. So the open data and the concept of open data was launched or was initiated about 10 years ago through the Transparency Aid Initiative of the World Bank. This was looking at increasing transparency in grants and loans that were made so that we actually knew where the money was going. The Open Government Directive from the Obama administration then took this at a country level, and the first data.gov site was put online in 2009. The Open Government Partnership began with 8 countries in 2011, and now we have 65 countries. 65 countries and industry and civil society. So there's an active group of people that are building data catalogs, publishing those catalogs, and making them available. Data by itself isn't necessarily going to do anything for us. It's data in use, data as labor, that's going to make a difference. One of the problems that we have with government, and where I think the crowd can change things for us, is that when government collects data, they process the data, and then eventually they publish it. How they publish it may or may not be in a format that's actually usable, and then when they publish it may or may not be within a timely fashion. So one of the questions from before was, how do you keep the data current? I think this is going to be one of our areas for work, and where I believe that a world of shared ownership and responsibility may actually help us keep things current. But what that's going to require is that we think about the data in a different way. So to the work that has been done from Civico, is Civico's data set part of a common data set that can be shared by other entities? Is it something that I could map in with one of the data catalogs, either from the United Nations, from the city itself, the data.gov.co site within Colombia? These are points which would be very interesting to look at. How you gather data, and I wanted to give an example of a platform that some people I've been working with over the last 6 months called IdeaScale. And IdeaScale is a platform that looks at how you gather some of the data. This would be essentially a large funnel that takes in ideas from customers, employees within the civil service system. They work both within the commercial sector as well as in the government space. You bring in those ideas. You then have people that have contributed vote on those ideas. Teams get built around them. You refine the ideas. You bring in the SMEs to actually vet and make sure that we're not going down and working on ideas that are not of particular value. And then you actually start to build and track these. There's a current project. This is a beta site in Singapore that's got a fair amount of traction right now called e-Citizen Ideas, where the government is crowdsourcing the types of efforts and initiatives that they want to be working on, how to have better HDB living, and other such ideas. There's I wrote this down, there are about 200 ideas that are already up there, a little over 5,000 comments on those ideas, or members on those ideas, and maybe the number of votes, I can't read my handwriting here, but this was just launched, and so it's getting a fair amount of traction. This is an example from the UK. It's not a new example, but I think it's a good example to hit on something about the emotional feeling that one might or might not have for one city, basically by getting in citizen involvement. Juan talked about the fact that there's not a feeling of Bogota or a Bogoteño, and I think that's an issue in many places, and a lot of it is because we're detached from where we live. We don't feel that our participation in the process of caring for the city that I live in or is actually valued or even meaningful. And so you've seen there are a lot of different examples of sort of 311 services that are providing information. There are also that are allowing people to make changes within the government, within the infrastructure. So Love Clean Streets was part of an initiative in a county of London, or a borough of London called Lewisham, where they were looking to reduce graffiti and something called fly tipping. Now, I had to look up what fly tipping was, and for those of you who don't know what it is, it's the dumping of large, bulky items like mattresses and big bits of garbage. What they did was they built a very simple phone app that you would just take a picture of the graffiti or the offensive articles. You would transmit them into the government. Government would then it would create a trouble ticket. Within the SLA that they had was 24 hours that they would clean up or pick up. And then they took action on it. You could track the progress of your issue the same way you would track a shipment with FedEx or another shipping company, and things got cleaned up. I want to show a video now, which is basically a newsreel on Love Clean Streets. And there are two things to look out for. One is listen for emotion and watch for emotion of the participants in the video that are being interviewed, and how you see the pride that they feel for their town and this particular small part of London. And then the other thing is towards the end, there's a city councillor who talks about the reduction in cost and the increase in effectiveness.
Right, when it comes to tackling fly tipping and graffiti, where Lewisham leads, the world follows. The South London Council's developed a phone app to tackle those who dump their rubbish and run. And apparently it's become so successful, other countries are desperate to copy it. Marcus Powell explains.
On the streets of Lewisham, they have a hit squad that's attracting worldwide attention. Taking pictures of rubbish may not look that impressive, but from Canada to the Caribbean, from the USA to Japan, they're now setting up free phone applications like this, which help keep the streets clean and allow watchful neighbours to keep an eye on what's going on. Here it's fly tipping or graffiti that the council pledged to clear up within 24 hours of you posting the pictures on their website.
Because if it wasn't done, it would just be a fly tip everywhere. And what you find is if someone fly tips and it's not cleared fast enough, you get people add to it. So the fly tip just grows and grows. So our motto is as soon as we get the call for it, we try and get there as fast as we can to clear it.
Absolutely. If you take pride in where you live, you know, it could be a better place. Lewisham Borough is a good place to live in.
I mean, you've got the old slogan on your T-shirt.
Love Lewisham, that's what it's all about, yeah.
It means something then round here.
Oh, definitely, definitely. A lot of people do take pride in where they live, and that's it.
The Love Lewisham campaign and website has seen the amount of fly tipping drop by 53% in the past 5 years. It's cut the cost of collection, speeded up response times, and it's the sort of innovation that has brought admirers from all over the place. Even the Japanese have come here to inspect our technology.
Well, we know they're very good, and recently we did a comparison of how we were 4 years ago. 4 years ago we collected something like 14,000 tonnes of rubbish, of fly tipping. This year we collected less than 7,000, and with disposal costs doubling, 4 years ago we were paying something like 580k. This year we're only paying 540, so we've actually kept within that budget.
Back at Mission Control, Nigel Tyrrell, who dreamed up the photo apps, is already looking at the before and after pictures before we've even returned to the depot. No wonder Lewisham's example has now been picked up by the Mayor of London and is also going nationwide. Marcus Powell, London Tonight.
Well done, Lewisham, but that's probably because I'm biased. All right.
So what was interesting about that was that it did go viral. It was used across London. There are many similar applications that exist under other platforms that were built around this. And it also did get deployed in Tokyo. And the Koreans were also looking at it. So these types of applications build accountability, a sense of I do matter, I can make a difference in my community, particularly if there is accountability built into the system. So in other words, there was a commitment from the government that we were going to take action when certain things happened. And then when the citizen reported, they did take action. So that, to me, that's the question of trust that we were talking about before, is they built trust. This is, in the interest of time, I'm going to skip through these, but this is more looking at all the different inputs that would be coming to a device based on, you're being told by your digital assistant it's time to leave because of traffic, weather, and routing information. Similar for train services. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about what do we do when we have the data, when we have big data. And if you're not familiar with Ben Wellington, I highly suggest you search on his name and look for his TED Talk. Ben is a data scientist who's living in New York City and doing a lot of work in New York, particularly tackling some of the problems that government's never going to tackle, that citizens may or may not have the ability to tackle. And he's doing it from the large data sets that he's gotten from the New York City government. So this is an interesting one of no cabs at 4 p.m. In Singapore, we call that shift change. And it's a real problem. And you kind of wonder who thought up shift change right at the beginning of rush hour, right? Whether it's in Singapore or New York City. It makes no sense. Yet, no one's really taken on the problem. What Ben did was he's basically mapped out, the data he had was tip data. So the tip that was given to the taxi drivers. And he was able to show that there's a 20% drop in tips between 3:30 and 5:30, with the low point being 4:30 in the afternoon. That's during shift change. What's interesting about that, that's showing you tips, but that's also general revenue. So you have revenue that kind of grows like this to rush hour and then dips off in the middle of the night. There's a V like that in there. He could only do that by having access to the data set. He's also, these are taken from his TED Talk, but he also calculated and found what was the most expensive place to park in New York City based on fines. And there were two spots. One, there was $35,000 a year in parking fines from this one place that was badly marked, and down in the East Village. He basically took that data, took it to New York, took it to the city, and they repainted the lines, and then no one was parking there anymore. What Ben is struggling with, and what many people are struggling with open data, is it's hard to get open data. And so how open is a really big question. On the FOIL request, the FOIL is based on, in the US, the Freedom of Information Law. This data you actually have to apply for. You will then get a grant for the data, and then you have to go down and physically pick it up. It's not online. It's not available. The other thing is that you're often getting each Department of Education, Department of Consumer Affairs, Department of Health, they each have a different way of their database for addresses is different. So there's not a use of standards, international or de facto standards on how they actually publish their data. Biggest problem I think Ben's been facing and many of us have faced is the fact that it's often the publication of PDFs. And how useful is a PDF? You've got to get a scraper on it. You've got to figure out the whole structure of the data. So if the request, if anything, is that, for anyone in government that's associated with any of this, publish really open data, and then and make available the data set as well as the PDF if you want to do that. So give me different forms of it. Work with some of the open data standards, OData, REST standards. There are many standards. The other thing is keep it current. So that was a question from before, and this was on the 17th of April. I was in a taxi. I took this picture. I thought, oh, reflections, interesting. Let me look at it. Maybe it's a good input from citizen input that I could use in my talk. I was hoping to use it in a slightly different context. This was a project or a survey, a citizen survey that started in 2012. They have a website. They did some great work, and they got some fantastic input. The problem is that that ad is actually not the current set of things that the government's doing. And on their Facebook page, the last post and the last activities on it was November of 2013. So we've got to find a way to end of life the data and the approaches that we're doing, and then end of life or deprecate and send people to what's next. So a little more of what's needed. You've got quite a list there, but I'll give you another example from Palo Alto, California, which has a very extensive data set for the city. They've even mapped each tree, and they have a URI, which gives the specific geographical location of every single tree in the city. But they're licensing their data, or if you want to use the data set, the licensing terms are virtually untouchable to industry players. So you have a problem of if the city of Palo Alto were to be sued because of the data, you would then have to defend them in court because of their data. They also take no accountability for the quality of the data, which is problematic for me, just sort of philosophically, if this is the data that the city's making decisions on, yet they won't assume accountability for it, they won't say we own it, that's a problem. So what's made me think more and more about, is this an intersection point where the crowd can help? So Civico is doing its own mapping. The government has a set of mapping. There are all these different inputs that we can use to actually clean up our data. And I'm thinking of a world of joint ownership. How can we do this in a way that when I give you input, you actually fix what's not right? There was one example of this that I'm aware of from Europe, which is there was a project called Eye on Earth, which was driven by the EU, looking to raise consciousness around water and air quality. And they essentially got online, sort of on a map, all of the data from the water and air sensors that they had available to them. And then they provided a social input feed so that, if the sensor said good, as it does in this case, and then your own rating is, the air is not bad, it's not good, we have this problem. It allows them over time to basically see, we've got a problem here, and let's go fix the sensor, or let's recalibrate, let's see what's going on. And so there's a kind of a using of citizen input or crowd input to actually validate data sets. And I think this is something that would be worth looking at going forward, but I also think the key is our willingness and our ability to actually share the data sets. And to end with a quote, in dreams begin responsibilities, or in shared dreams begin shared responsibilities. And perhaps we can start sharing some of the load of maintaining these data sets and working together towards smarter cities. Thank you.
Great. Michael, thank you very much. This is really good. Learned a lot. And it's very important. I mean, how fresh the data is, we have to really look for it and who really owns it. I think this is really key issues. Are we asking a specific questions regarding the data, right? Do you agree? Yeah. Like a lot of people, they just talk about data, but are we asking specific questions about data? These are the key things that I want. One or two questions here, please. Anyone?
I wonder if you have heard of the project in the UK called HETDB. HET stands for Hub of All Things. It's a data platform that is designed to return your personal data to the owners. Because as you alluded, there are lots of data, in government agencies, in consumer data, for example, in banks and retailers and so on. So the Hub of All Things, which is currently a experimental project funded by a number of universities, Cambridge, Edinburgh, and so on. What it hopes to do is provide a platform that collects this data and then use the platform to contextualize the data so that it is useful and meaningful to yourself. And at the end of the day, you can choose apps or whatever to make decisions. And I think this is one way that crowd can actually share the data and enable that data to be used for all sorts of purposes. So it's an initiative which is just started over a year ago, and hopefully it can revolutionize the way we make use of data.
So to be honest, I was not aware of it, but it sounds fantastic. The question, I'd sort of throw back a question at you. Is it also with the intent of protecting my personal information or correcting, let's say, from a reputation, we spoke a lot about reputation this morning. Is it linked to the right to be forgotten and some of that aspect, or is it just essentially gathering all data about a specific individual?
At the end of the day, you decide, whether that data is to be shared. So you have absolute control of that data.
That's fantastic.
And I think it's something revolutionary, but the Googles of this world will oppose it.
Yeah.
Suggestions for how we can actually make OGP, the Open Government Partnership, work because there have been these two summits, right, all around, one in London, one in Bali, and we talk about it, but it's much more aspirational than it is a reality now. And from the things that you said, PDFs, getting the data to a .csv is so like it's a golden grail. How can we move this forward?
So you're sort of calling out the primary failing of my talk, which was to actually link that, because I agree with you, and I was involved with OGP in the past. And I think one of the problems, and it's a little bit linked to the previous question, is that once you start getting a lot of data, once you start doing cross-correlations, that actually gives you a lot of information that governments may or may not, they may actually have concerns about it from a security perspective. And so the point I'd wanted to make in my talk was that's less of a concern when you're at a city level. So when we take it at a national level, and the problem with OGP is a national initiative, when you take it down to a city level, you can actually make much more progress without raising concerns of national security and other such issues that are going to immediately get people just going in for the meetings and not necessarily taking real action. The other challenge with open data and OGP is that I think open data specifically within government, and that's why I say I think we need to have multiple data sets, is that sometimes it's a political plaything. Right? It's something, I'm going to do open data because it's exciting and new and it's going to get me votes. And it doesn't actually get sustained after I get elected, right? So and I think that's where we have to, where the crowd can really kind of put the squeeze on people when it's not actually happening.
Great.
Okay.
Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you, and looking forward to...
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you.